It is January 13th, 2015. My name is Jenny Matz, and it is my honor and pleasure to be interviewing Vin Di Bona in West Los Angeles for the Archive of American Television.
Well, Jenny Matz, it's my pleasure to have you talk with me, and we'll have some fun.
Thank you. Hi, Vin.
Hey, Jenny, how are you?
Good. Thanks for taking this time today.
It's fun.
So we're going to take a few minutes to talk about your early childhood. Can you tell us when you were born and what was your name at birth?
My name at birth was Vincent. I was born April 10th, 1944. I weighed 2.5 pounds.
No.
And it was pretty much a miracle that I lived.
Is that true?
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah. 1944, they were just discovering the ramifications of oxygen in oxygen tents. And had I been in the oxygen tent another 3 or 4 days, pretty much could have gone blind.
Wow.
And my mother's doctor, read something in the New England Journal. It said over-oxygenation could cause blindness, and he pulled me out, and I am forever thankful.
And timing is everything, I guess.
Timing, yeah.
Wow. Can you tell us where you grew up?
I grew up in Cranston, Rhode Island, a city of about 115,000 people. My mom and dad were restaurateurs. They owned one of the most famous restaurants in the state. It started out as a diner in the early 30s. It was called Lindy's. And it actually became famous because the mustard my dad used on hot dogs, he mixed up himself with some spices from around the world, and it became a really unique mustard, and that's how he made his name. And then in the 50s, he and his partner split, and my mom and dad took over the restaurant together, and they built, the restaurant was about 150 people seating in the restaurant, but then we had a banquet room that seated 450 and a cocktail lounge that seated 100. So it was a pretty big deal, and it was a lot of family. There were 38 employees, and a lot of my uncles and aunts and cousins, as well as myself, worked at the restaurant.
What were your parents' names?
Jean and John.
Mm-hmm.
My mother's actual name is Vincenza, which leads us to a problematic time in the family because her name was Vincenza. Her brother's name was Vincent. When I was born, I was Vin. Her brother had a son. He was Vin Jr. So there's a lot of Vins floating around in the family. Now, the crowning touch was another cousin was named Vin, and he wound up being an electrician. And so to differentiate between all of us at a dinner, he became Electric Vinny.
That's a great name.
Yeah.
And did you have any siblings?
I have half-brothers and sister, and we're very friendly toward each other, and they're dear friends, and as brothers and sisters, we care and love each other. We didn't really grow up together because it was separate households, but because it was the restaurant, we all worked together. You know, both my brothers were short order cooks. I was a terrible cook. I was thrown out of the kitchen many, many times, but I could take cash when I was 10. So I was on the cash register sometimes helping my mom out. I became a waiter when I was 14. I parked cars when I was 13, and I sang in the lounge when I was 15.
Oh, I want to hear about your alter ego.
Yes,
singing. Yes. Tell us about that.
His name was Johnny Lindy, sometimes still is, occasionally. I had been in kind of the performing arts since I was 8 years old. I think my mother really wanted to be on stage, but really didn't have she had the flair for understanding what was really good, and we would go to Blindstrup's nightclub, not when I was 8, but certainly when I was 14 or 15, and started singing, and we'd see every single major act that came to New England. And then I was in summer stock in the Warwick Musical Theater, which was a round tent, and I appeared as a singer, dancer, stagehand with Zero Mostel in high-button shoes, and in Annie Get Your Gun with Ginger Rogers. So I have a great Annie Get Your Gun story.
Well, let's hear it.
It's a theater in the round, and the overture is playing, and the theater is all black. And the very first thing that happens is the sort of chorale where Annie would perform was set up by us stagehands, and it was sort of 1x6 pieces of wood, and you'd stick them in the side of the stage, and you'd plug them in, and that would become the chorale. So I came out as one of 4 or 5 other stagehands to plug my section in, and I couldn't find a plug, and I'm moving around in the black, and I finally found a cord and a receptacle for the cord, and I figured I've got to get my lights on. I have no idea what that cord is for. I yanked the cord, I plugged in my lights, and I pulled out all the power to the orchestra pit. That was my beginning in musical theater, and it didn't go much beyond that. I did one piece with Burgess Meredith at Theater by the Sea in Matunic, The Remarkable Mr. Pennypacker. And it was a story of this little mousy accountant who had 2 families, one in Philadelphia and one in New York. And he went back and forth between both families. It was quite wonderful. But I really started when I was 8 with the Walker Dramateers. And Mrs. Walker would take both adults and kids who wanted to be in television or on stage. And we had elocution lessons, and we had drama lessons, and etiquette lessons, all wrapped up in one. You know, you do so much of this and so much of that. And to this day, I will never forget, it was our finals, so to speak, you know, and I aced the dramatic, I aced the elocution. And the test for me was, she had a grand staircase, and I was asked to just simply walk down the staircase. And I failed because as a man, you're not supposed to touch the railing as you walk down the staircase. Now, truthfully, today, if that happened, I would be bounding and falling and tumbling down the staircase, not using a handrail. But that was what we were taught, you know. She had a really great conduit on Saturday mornings. It was called the Walker Dramateers on WPAW radio in Pawtucket, Rhode Island. Mm-hmm. Pawtucket, not one of the fonder places in Rhode Island, kind of an industry town, but a small radio station. And it was in the days, because this was in 1952, where we did our own sound effects, you know, with coconuts for horse hooves and all of that. And we got a chance to really, I think it was a step above playing radio, because we, you know, with the scripts we tackled were fun, and it was family, and it was kids and everything, and adults. So that was really kind of a unique experience. Started DJing when I was a freshman at Emerson. I was DJing on a couple of local radio stations in Providence. I enjoyed that. All for free, no pay. Mm-hmm. It was, I think they hired me because I had a pretty good record collection, much more than anything else. But I enjoyed radio. And at Emerson, I wound up being the station manager, and we changed the station around. We made it a rock station. They had 2 stations. There was a rock station and a classical station. The classical station is, well, it's no longer classical now. It's actually mixed with a lot of jazz. The Emerson station now is pretty much the most important live jazz station in the country. Mm-hmm. So there are a lot of transitions between 68 and 2015.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
So going back a little bit, it sounds like you had some kind of a bug for performing. And
I did.
Yeah. What did you want to do? And it sounds like your parents encouraged it.
Well, they did. And you know, but I also went through clarinet, piano, accordion. No, not violin. That was my daughter. So those at least 3. Oh, and guitar. And I wasn't good at any of them because I didn't practice. What did I practice? Singing. I used to practice maybe 2 hours, 3 hours a day, much to the chagrin of my other subjects. I was a average student, and because I was singing a lot, especially in high school, my grades were just okay. I would get, oh God, I got a B, great, but that was in semester 2, and semester 3 was really where it counted. But I was lucky enough to get into Emerson.
Why did
Because
you want to go there?
Well, I knew that I wanted to be part of. I thought it was radio at the time, and I think that my average in school was probably my average in school was probably B minus C plus, but my level of extracurricular activities that they tested for went to 125%. And that was in the arts. I failed every single farming question, but every question that dealt with lighting or projections or shooting film, I did pretty well. Because I'd had a film camera since I was 7.
Oh, really?
Yeah, 16 millimeter too. So I did a lot of different things in that area. So Emerson was a really good school for me because, I didn't know it then, but the philosophy about Emerson was if you're a street fighter and you don't take no for an answer, probably going to work out. And didn't know that then, but it's kind of the philosophy that school evokes in one. It's interesting. I was at a board meeting at Emerson, and we were talking about grades and talking about reaching a higher level of acceptance, and the acceptance level was at 3.5. And we looked around the room, and in the room was Tom Freston, Lucy Solhaney, Max Munchnick, Kevin Bright, Gary Grossman, and myself. And we all stopped to think for a second. We couldn't have gotten in with a 3.5. We didn't have 3.5s. Oddly enough, when you get to the school, because you're doing something you love, everything else, you start succeeding all along, and it just multiplies and multiplies. The best thing that, I'm going back a bit, the best thing that happened to me in high school was a history teacher taught us how to take notes. For me, and any student, even today, although I don't know how notes are taken, I'm sure it's probably on some kind of iPad, iPhone, whatever. The idea was you take your notes, you scribble them as fast as you can, or however it's done today. I think maybe still a little bit of that exists. But the important thing was you go home that night and you copy those notes over neatly so that when it comes time for an exam, it's all there. All you got to do is look at those notes. That's the best advice I can give to any young student from high school to college.
And who's your fraternity brother and roommate?
I had 3 fraternity brothers who were really helpful as we started. One was from Massachusetts, one from Pennsylvania, and myself from Rhode Island. Second year, this guy who liked to carry a book bag and wear a scarf became part of the fraternity, and his name was Henry. And Henry wound up going, after Emerson, going to Yale and coming out to L.A., and on his birthday, Henry was in an audition, and he was asked to go into the restroom of a diner, look into the mirror, and comb his hair. And on his birthday that day, Henry said, I'm going to go into the bathroom, I'm going to look into the mirror, and I'm going to go, hey. And that's Henry Winkler's character of the Fonz. That's how it was born.
Yeah.
It's a pretty amazing story. I remember sitting at a restaurant on on Sunset, and I can't remember the cross street, but anyway, we were sitting there. It was a restaurant that was in Annie Hall, and he said, "Vin, I'm starting to get more letters than Ron Howard. I don't know what this is going to be, but I think it's going to be great." And the rest was, amazing history.
Yeah.
And the most respectful, the most wonderful, the most caring, the most concerned. He's just an amazing man. Always will be. And again, the story he tells is never take no for an answer. Now, listen. The dynamics of never taking no for an answer are you better be damn well sure you're right, and then you can go ahead and do it. But if you have a question about whether you're right or wrong, then you really need to think that out because you could look pretty foolish. But if in your heart and in your gut, which is kind of like the way I like to do television, you think you're right, then you go for it. Yeah. Doesn't hurt.
I want to just go back for a minute. We're going to talk about Henry later when we get to later parts of your career, but do you recall the first time you saw television and what sort of
Yes,
shows
I do. It was 1948. It was a Saturday afternoon. This is not a joke. 1948, Saturday afternoon, I was 4.5 years old. It was a birthday party, and it was the Lone Ranger. And he came around that rock with Tonto and, and the saying and all of that. So the amazing thing was when I did MacGyver, we actually went out and shot at Vasquez Rocks. And I'm standing there saying, holy shit, I remember this from 4.5 years old. And I'm looking at the damn rock. Pretty amazing. Pretty amazing.
What other shows did you remember watching that influenced you?
I loved Laugh-In. I loved science fiction theater. It was a syndicated show. I loved watching Superman. Again, probably because I was a sickly child, and I had identified with wanting to be something like Superman. I remember that, and I was a sickly child because once and again, being born weighing 2.5 pounds, my lungs were a mess. Got better, but I was out of school. If there were 185 school days a year, I was out 30. But I remember my parents going to the restaurant at lunch, working at lunch, and I was brought lunch home, and I was by myself. I was about 10. And it was a cold, blustery winter day. And I put on my heavy jacket, and I went outside in the snow, and I visualized myself as a Roman soldier, conquering whatever needed to be conquered. There's a lot of psychological stuff going on there. But I had to get through a lot of that stuff when I was a kid, I had every single something that could be caught, I caught. I had infectious hepatitis. I had a tick in my foot. And the doctor pulled it out. He said, I don't get this. This is a German wood tick. We don't have those here. I got it,
Born into adversity.
Yeah. But I remember I was standing behind the cash register with my mother one day. I was 9, and I was out of school because I was sick. And it really hurt me. And this guy said, wow, you really look like a little sick kid. And it really pissed me off. Really, really made me angry. I get to L.A., and I'm at Junior's Delicatessen, and I see the guy from Cranston, Rhode Island.
Wow.
And I introduced myself. He said, oh, I remember you. Yeah, you were a little kid then. I didn't say anything.
talk a bit about what changed from your decision to go to Emerson and pursue possibly radio to then going to UCLA for graduate school and doing something totally different?
So I loved radio, and I was pretty good at it. I have a fairly decent sense of humor, and I really like spinning records, and in the second year we took television, and the first exercise was a 30-second live commercial. You fade up from black, you go to a camera card, you change the card, you have music and an announcer, and then you fade out. Scared the bejesus out of me. I swear to God, I was so nervous, I didn't know what the hell. And so I decided after that first one, I'm in radio. Television, I'll let those other guys do it. Then we did a second one. And I practiced being a director and rolling the cues and all of that in front of a mirror for about an hour. And when it came time to do the assignment, I nailed it. And then it was starting like eating a huge bowl of peanuts. You know, you couldn't stop. And I really started to learn about lighting. A friend of mine and I, we used to go live for 4 hours every Thursday. And we would do our own game show. We had a record hop show and a talk show. So my friend and I, Jeff Goldstein, created a record hop show, a record show called Help. The Beatles had just broken, so it was called the Help Show. And we did basically a dance party show every Thursday afternoon with 2 black and white Dage cameras, the worst possible equipment in the world. Now they've got all the best, little bastards. And they do great stuff with it, you know. But that was our start, and we became a member of the honorary broadcasting fraternity, AERO, and we held a convention at our school. You know, Emerson at that time, we had 400 students. It was a tiny school. And we did the Help Show and a bunch of other shows, and we razzle-dazzled these folks from all over the country. We had kids from USC television saying, wow, how do you do that? Well, we built the studio ourselves. You know, our the head of the department said, I'll give you $150. You can rebuild the studio. And in those days, we bought a lot of paneling, and the key to all of that was molding. Because molding covers up all of the mistakes from the miscuts of the panel. You get a large piece of molding, you can cover a multitude of sins, you know. And so we built our own control room. We had a little high platform so the director could look down. And we impressed the hell out of these kids. We really did. We had a good time. And then it became time to go to grad school, or at least wanting to go to grad school. And one of my fraternity brothers from our broadcasting fraternity, Mike Kletter, had decided he wanted to go to UCLA, as did I. He wanted to continue in television, and I thought, you know what, let me learn something new. So I decided to try for film. And the good news was UCLA at the time didn't have graduate record exams, because I always did poorly in all of those tests. And so I got, you know, I was on Dean's List by that time in Emerson, because once again, you're doing stuff you love, everything else goes up. You know, everything else is a piece of cake. And so my grades got me into UCLA Film School, and it was terrific.
And was documentary your passion?
Documentary became my passion. I had the really great fortune of having two instructors, Mark McCarty, who's no longer, well, both of them are no longer with us, and Basil Wright. Basil was one of the key directors in the British Film Unit in the 40s and had done the most poetic documentary films ever done. Song of Ceylon, Night Mail, a couple of others who I can't think of right now, but he was one of my final instructors, and it was great. And I did 3 films. The first was the comedy, 2.5-minute film on a guy who you couldn't get parking at UCLA. It was like impossible. And so this guy got a parking pass. and it was all about how to get the parking pass. Second film was I spent about a week and a half in an old black shoemaker's shop on Normandy, downtown, and I just was in the shop watching him cobble shoes, and it was pretty well received. It's interesting what happens. The guy, everybody did something different in the class. So I had a guy who was a cinematographer, and he underexposed everything, not on purpose, by mistake. So everything was a little bit muddy. And I'll never forget, the review was, the film has this quality, this Dutch quality to it, a Rembrandt-like quality. Rembrandt bullshit. It was underexposed, and so it was different eyes see things differently. But my final film was a film on hobos, and I lived out on the tracks on weekends. I shouldn't say lived on. I was on the tracks because we were at a little motel, and it was a great division. It was called the Ethnographic Film Division. And they took a film student and an anthropology student, and we worked together on a project. The particular guy that worked with me was an ethnomusicologist, and he wanted to do the project because he wanted to record original hobo songs out on the tracks, which we did. But we spent almost a month and a half out on the tracks with itinerants, and we spent a weekend in a rescue mission and interviewed a lot of the guys on the tracks. Always wanting money. We never gave out money. We gave out, unfortunately in those days, we gave out cigarettes because everybody wanted cigarettes.
What do you think you took about storytelling or filmmaking from Basel or from the classes you took at that time?
Heart. Telling the story that was the closest to the truth that you could get. I remember one of the hobos was trying to scam me, and I rolled. I was also shooting at the time. I was rolling and shooting and interviewing, and you could see, and I didn't egg him on, but I let him try and scam me on camera to show, to show the depths of what sometimes it takes to stay alive. And that was in the film, and you can see the transition, The best experience I had in interviewing someone, I was doing films for WBZ in Boston. And this film was, we did specials. Once a month, we preempted the entire network for an entire evening. And we did a 1-hour documentary film. And then, except for news, we would preempt all of evening programming and late night programming, including Carson. And it would focus on an issue once a month. And I would produce the films and the live studio, because I had both studio and film. And this particular film was about the economy. It was in the early 80s, early 70s, when we had the energy crisis. And I interviewed John Kenneth Galbraith, who was the biggest economist of his time. And we started talking, and he had these huge theories about the economy. And I took a deep breath, and I said, Mr. Galbraith, I don't understand you. I don't understand what you're trying to say to the folks who are going to watch this film. And I said, holy shit, he's going to nail me. He's going to kill me. He said, well, then I better start speaking in easier terms. And he went down everything, and he knocked it all out. And that's where I really learned that, A, to listen and not have your next question prepared, because you're going to miss something, And and to be able to have follow through and to question who you're talking with. We started out that film with a really interesting concept. How do you do a film? And once again, most of my documentaries were really aimed at the blue-collar worker. Because if you could get that, you could get anybody. And I always felt it's almost like you've got to talk as if you were the man from Mars, meaning you understand nothing about the topic. So if you're going to build on the topic, you've got to get the first through line. Once you buy the premise, you buy the bit. You buy the through line, you hook them. So we said, what could we possibly do to get people interested in a show about the economy? So we decided to go to a drugstore near a grade school that had a candy counter. And we shot the same group of kids 5 days in a row. They came in and bought their penny candy. And the next day we upped it to 2 cents. And then the third day we upped it again. And then you could start seeing them by Thursday, starting to figure out which candy bar had the most volume of candy. And if they could share it together, could they pool their money together? And Tootsie Roll became a big one because it lasted, fairly long. And by Friday, they'd figured it out. And that was the premise for our documentary on the economy.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, that hooked them.
Yeah.
Talk about moving back to Boston after UCLA and working in your first job at WBZ.
Yeah. As I was at UCLA, I went back for winter vacation, and I went back to WBZ, and interviewed with Squire Rushnell, who was he wasn't the program, he was a program executive. I think he was doing all the specials. And he had liked me, and he said, please stay in touch. And so the week I left school, I called Squire, and Squire's boss at the time was a fellow named Bill Wirch, and he had left, and he had gone to a station in Indianapolis. It was an Avco station. And both of them wanted to see me when I was driving across the country for work. And in fact, by my third day, I called to check in to say I was coming, and Bill Wirch in Indianapolis offered me a job as a director, straight out of school, in their documentary film unit, because he had seen my Shoemaker film. And I told him I was stopping in Indianapolis on a Friday night, and I would see him on Saturday. But my friend Squire said, if you come to work on Monday, he said, I'll start you as a stage manager. And your first job, you'll be assigned to the opening of the Thomas Crown Affair. Not bad. So Friday night, I stopped at a hotel, and I went to dinner in the dining room at the hotel. 1968, sorry. And the women were wearing bobby socks in 1968. And I said to myself, I'm not sure I want to be working in a city where the women are still wearing bobby socks. And I called up Bill Wirch and said, I think I'm going to pass. I really kindly appreciate your offer.
What was wrong with bobby socks?
It just wasn't sophisticated enough for me. It just wasn't. Not in 68.
And that did it.
Yeah. And then I went to work in Boston. Now, life comes full cycle, you see, because the guy that actually took that job in Indianapolis wound up syndicating America's Funniest Home Videos.
Oh, really?
With MTM Productions, Chuck Larson. And we often chuckle about that story. So
paths crossing in the night.
They sure do.
So at WBZ, your first job then was the Thomas Crown Affair. So
I would say the first job was going like this on the Thomas Crown Affair for somebody to do something else. I started as a stage manager, and then we had a little talent show called Community Auditions, and there was a wonderful host, Dave Maynard, And I used to really get the audience to applaud and get them really pumped up. And as we'll have it, a director got pissed off and said, "I'm out of here." And so the station manager went to Dave and said, "Dave, well, you have a lot of the stage managers here." He said, "Well, that Di Bona kid, he gets well, so make him a director."
And boom, you were a director?
I was a director. Boom, I'm a director.
Had you done that before?
Not professionally.
Uh-huh.
I'd done it at school.
Sure.
And then I started, it was I was a journeyman at that point.
Mm-hmm.
And
was it live at the time? Or
most of it was live, sure.
Mm-hmm.
Some tape. It was an amazing station. Aside from all the live newscasts, the morning newscast, the midday newscast, we had 19 hours of original programming every week on that station. And so I started to build up a reputation. I was also making films for them at the same time. I was doing film on violence in America, which became a syndicated film, Savage Root. I was doing that, directing news, doing live talk shows. And then in 1972, I was assigned to the dearest friends in my life, Tanya Hart, Daisel Banks, an incredible cinematographer, 6'4" black man, strongest guy I ever met in my life, could charm any woman in the world. His opening line to any woman was, "Sweetheart," and they would always melt. And then an Hispanic fellow, Henry Maldonado, who was my assistant at Emerson when I was teaching, and a brilliant guy from Harvard who became our host, Lavelle Diet, who was one of the younger guys on the periphery at Selma. And he knew everybody in the world. And they gave us the charge to do the first fully sponsored black magazine show in the nation. Mm-hmm. And we did everything. We went everywhere. We interviewed Martin Luther King's mother on Mother's Day. And we went to the Black National Convention in Gary, Indiana. Everybody who stopped through town stopped. We had Cannonball Adderley at somebody's house cooking chitlins in the kitchen. I don't know if you've ever been around chitlin cooking, but chitlins are entrails. And it's not the most pleasant smell in the world. Mm-hmm. But we did all of that. And we two of the members have passed on, but three of us are still very close. And Tanya and I talk all the time. She's here in L.A. Mm-hmm. And we did that for 3 years. We interviewed just about anybody and everybody who was huge in the black community or a red cap at Back Bay Station. His name was Jose Lewis. Mm-hmm. And his job was to put bags on the trains for folks. And his closing line as the train is departing the station and we have a shot of the train leaving the station, he'll say, "I just don't get it. We can put a man on the moon, but we can't get the Merchants Limited to New York on time." And it was, that was what made the show great, because you had Ralph Abernathy in the first segment and Jose Lewis in the third segment, and it was a brilliant show.
Did you control the format of the show? Were you writing as well?
No, Lavelle wrote. Mm-hmm. I controlled the format. It was at a point where we had so much respect from station management, they just let us do whatever we wanted. Mm. They have no idea. We shot 200,000 feet of film one year. That's a lot of footage. But we got great stuff. Mm. Great stuff.
So then what prompted you to leave Boston again and return to L.A. In 70?
So when I left L.A. in 78 and I crossed the line at Needles and it said leaving California, I said, bullshit, I'll be back. I made that promise. And by the time in 77, I had done all of the stuff that could be done at the station, plus I'd done 2 syndicated shows for Westinghouse. I tried out for the Mike Douglas show, but didn't get it.
For what position?
Directing.
Mm-hmm.
And the year after that, I decided I would come to LA to scope it out. I'd lived here, obviously, for a couple of years. So I wrote a letter to the 3 network stations and PBS. And the letter said, "My name is Vin Di Bona. I'm the best producer-director in Boston. My resume is not bullshit. If you're interested, so am I." That was it. And I figured the 3 network stations could handle it. I was really worried about what's the PBS guy going to say. PBS guy wrote back saying, "How wonderful, a guy whose resume is not bullshit. Come in and see me." So I came in, and this was in 76. It was a year before I actually made the move. And I'd made a dent with all 3. But once again, to anybody who wants to come to Los Angeles, you got to be here. People need to know that you take yourself seriously enough to plunk your feet down. And so that's what I did in 77. Mm-hmm. And I came out in 77 and couldn't find work for 9 months. And finally I got a job at KNXT. Van Gordon Sauter hired me. And I was to do all their specials. Mm-hmm. And that became sort of my start here in Los Angeles.
I read you had an interaction with Dick Clark where he gave you some advice.
Dick Clark gave me the best advice. Now, Squire Rushnell, who hired me in Boston on my first job, wound up going to ABC and running daytime and children's television and some of late night. Mm-hmm. So he hooked me up with Dick. And Dick looked at my tape. He said, "Vin, you're good." He said, "But here's the problem." He said, "Let's put it this way. I'm going to do a new show for CBS, okay? Nobody's ever seen it before. It's a new concept. And I've got the chance of hiring you or Marty Pacetta. So if I hire you and you do a great job, but somehow the show doesn't work, CBS comes to me and says, 'Dick, what the hell were you thinking?' Well, Dick says, 'I like this guy. He was Dick. Nobody knows who this guy is.' Okay. Now I hire Marty Pacetta. The exact same show happens. For some strange reason, it doesn't work. CBS comes to me and says, 'Dick, what happened?' And Dick says, 'I have no idea. I hired Marty Pacetta. He's the best guy in the business.' And he said, 'And I got an out.' He said, 'If you understand that,' he said, 'then you know you've got to make it up the road here.' And I'll never forget it. He was really terrific. Mm-hmm. Really terrific. I wound up working for Dick several times on American Music Awards, on country music shows, and he was a good guy.
So how did you wind up working your way up that ladder, making your name? Was Battle of the Network Stars one of the first shows?
No, Battle of the Network Stars happened later. Mm-hmm. I did a lot of stuff with Transworld International, who finally did Battle of the Network Stars.
Oh, it was KNXT.
Yeah, at KNXT I had done 3 or 4 documentaries. I'd done a show called Callback, which was really like, it was a predecessor to the Ed McMahon show. Can't think of the name of it now. Anyway. And I just started taking jobs as producer, director of small stuff. I was also working for my friend Jeff Goldstein, stage managing Wheel of Fortune. And I would show up as a stage manager dressed like this. And I'll never forget, there were twin brothers who ran audio. One of them worked at ABC and one of them worked at NBC. It was this fellow at NBC. He said, "You don't look like a stage manager." He said, "You look like a producer." And I said to myself under my breath, "You're goddamn right." Because I was a producer. It was just a different set of circumstances.
What were your duties there as stage manager?
Bringing the board in and out. And counting down for Chuck, when Chuck was doing the show. And I was actually doing 3 jobs. I was working at KNXT, doing documentaries, Wheel of Fortune on Saturdays, and Sunday I would fly to Vegas and do a football odds-making show from the Union Plaza Hotel in a truck that was so small that the monitors for the cameras were this big, and I couldn't actually figure out if the cameras were in focus. That's how small this truck was. But I had to, because I had been out of work for 9 months. I was managing our apartment building to lower my rent.
Wow. Were you making ends meet with all those 3 jobs, or was it still a struggle?
Yeah, by that time I was making ends meet.
Talk a little bit about the documentaries that you did at KNXT, Zoot Suit.
Yeah. There's 2. We did a lot of projects. We did Project Parenting, which was a 4-part series talking about parenting kids. When I was in Boston, I did a lot of stuff with kids. I did a series on how to raise kids from birth to 3, and we followed the book, Dr. Burton White, his book. And then I did something with the Gazelle Institute, which was like the big child-rearing institute. So I'd had this experience, and so at KNXT, we did Project Parenting, and then there was a project called Down at the Dunbar Hotel, and nobody wanted the project. It was about this black-owned hotel that had fallen into disrepair. It was the cat's meow in the 50s, in late 40s and early 50s, but it was basically a bombed-out hotel on Central Avenue. And 3 producers said, not doing that show. And so they asked me if I wanted to do it, and I looked at the history of the hotel, and everybody in the world performed and or lived at that hotel. Because in the 40s, black performers could perform anywhere, but they couldn't stay anywhere. So the Dunbar Hotel, first black-owned hotel west of the Rockies, owned by a dentist from USC. Everybody was there on a Saturday night. Duke Ellington would be there. Ella Fitzgerald, Red Fox. Everybody who was anybody stayed or performed at the Dunbar. And what happened was at 2 a.m, when all the other shows were out and all the white performers were finished, well, hell, they wanted to have fun. They went to the Dunbar. So that, they'd be at the Dunbar. Red Fox said he was running the kitchen at the Dunbar, and they would still be having, snacks at 12 o'clock Sunday. So we did this documentary. We found a guy who had a whole library of something called talkies. Soundies. Soundies were basically music videos, but shot on film, and they were in film jukeboxes.
Was this a Scopatone? Like a Scopatone?
It's something like that, yeah. And he owned all the library to all the black performers.
Wow.
So we made a deal with him. So we used all the great performances in the show. We got John Hendricks, who is a jazz performer, singer, to host the show. And he did the whole show. All his narration was in rhyme, rap, if you will. And so we wanted to, once again, to show the heart of the project. We wanted to find someone who had actually dated at the Dunbar. And at the time, there was a really wonderful young PA. Her name was Erica Gerard, who's now Erica Di Bona, who, before the internet, before any kind of research that was, easily find-outable, within 2 days she found a couple, Frank and Tilly, who had met at the Dunbar on a Friday night in the lounge and married 2 days later in the dining room. And 53 years later, they were still married. So we interviewed them, and that became part of the show. And then there was a party at Eula McClaney's house on Sunset and Beverly Glen. A very wealthy African-American woman made her money selling sweet potato pies, and then bought a whole bunch of nursing homes in Los Angeles. And I interviewed a 103 and a 103-year-old woman and a 109-year-old man who was at Lincoln's inauguration.
Oh, Lord.
So all this came together in this little half-hour show.
Wow.
And we won a Peabody.
You won a Peabody, and did you also win a local area Emmy?
Yeah, we won an Emmy too.
What
yeah.
was it like to get those honors for that project?
It was the Peabody was really special.
Mm-hmm.
It was pretty amazing because we went to New York. You know, it was at the Pier Hotel. It was and it was myself and station program director. And I remember I bought for breakfast. I ordered a coffee and a croissant, and he almost passed out when the bill came, and it was $31. And he was trying to figure out how to expense it, you know. But it was a glorious day. It really was. And then we did Zoot Suit, which was another great experience, working in the Hispanic community. And Zoot Suit was based around the Sleepy Lagoon murder, and basically, like 15 guys were brought to trial for the murder of this one fellow in Chavez Ravine, which is now Dodger Stadium.
Right.
And it revolved around this young Jewish woman lawyer, who felt that this was an atrocity for all these men to be corralled in.
And they were Latino.
And they were all Latinos.
Mm-hmm.
And she went to battle for them, and she got them, I think it was 3 to 5 years, she got them out. And so
After they had been indicted.
After they had been
indicted.
incarcerated, yeah.
Right.
And so I met with Luis Valdez and told him what I wanted to do, but I wanted to shoot his play. And I wanted to intercut the play with the real people and intermix throughout the show. And he agreed. And it was a great experience, and it was a terrific documentary.
What was the challenge for you of doing that intercutting? What was the biggest challenge?
Picking up the storylines from the show, from the play, to the actual on-camera interviews with the real people, the real female lawyer, and the real. There was another trial lawyer who was in San Diego. We got him. And then a lot of really great Hispanic people around. And then we talked about this Zoot Suit, the whole Zoot Suit phenomenon. And Luis Valdez told this great story at the end of the show. And I let the camera run for it's a 4-minute story. And he talked about, again, Hart, sorry if I hit my mic. He talked about being a kid in East LA and getting up in the morning and seeing his mother cook a burrito. And the flavor and the smell of the burrito, and it wrapped, in this great tortilla. And they didn't have any money, so they usually used C&H sugar cane bags as lunch bags. And he'd take this burrito to lunch to school. And you could feel the warmness of the burrito all throughout him walking to school. He said by the time lunch came, you'd look in your bag, and this wonderful thing had spots on it, and it turned brown, and it had gone cold. And he said, and we'd look across the lunch table, and all these white kids were eating these very precise sandwiches. And he said, it's then that we realize the difference between our nationalities, our cultures, and that was the barrier that he felt he had to cross. All about a lunch bag and a burrito. And that was the end of the documentary. But it's stories like that touch people, that bring them home to remember things that touch them in their lives. And that's what I like to do in documentaries. And I really enjoyed making documentaries. It was fun. It was a great experience.
And how did you choose some of the subjects? I mean, these two obviously came to you and
Yeah.
turned them down, but
Yeah.
how did you decide what issues were really important to you?
Well, in Boston, they basically came out of community ascertainment. To keep your license in those days, you had to show that you were a responsible citizen as a broadcaster. And so all of the staff, all of the directorial, producers, management staff would have to go out every month and do an ascertainment with a community leader or a community organization. And from those ascertainments, it was decided what month should be this and that. I did one on busing. It's funny how full circle comes. We spent a whole month going out talking about busing and when it was going to hit Boston, because it was huge when busing came to Boston. And we did our documentary. We went live for the next 6 hours, and we felt we had done a community service. And the next day, Ted Kennedy walks into Government Center and gets pelted by a Coke bottle, you know. And now let's go full circle. We're being inducted into the Smithsonian American History Museum. And our camcorder is right at the beginning of the hall as you walk in. And lo and behold, next to the camcorder is the back door of a school bus with a crack in the window from busing from Boston. I mean,
Wow.
what are the chances? I get tears in my eyes just thinking about it now.
And the impact of the documentaries and even doing this show, which we'll talk about in depth much later, America's Funny Town Videos, but the transition of the impact on the culture seems like there is an intersection.
Yes, you know, I think that home videos are little documentaries that are of family fun, of family foibles. And I think that's why I you know, it's a broad transition, but it's in some instances we're still showing America. I'm still showing, you know, the desire and the spirit of my documentary feelings. Kind of neat.
Let's talk about this transition now that seems to occur with you going from these very hard-hitting, socially important documentaries to more of an entertainment.
Yeah.
Was the first show then Battle, or was it Entertainment Tonight that you worked on? And how did that?
It was Entertainment Tonight was really the first big step. I had done several of the network shows as a segment director. I did the cry piece of the week on games people play. You know, I did a blind water skier, a cross-country runner who had no feet. You know, a kid who was on a motorbike who lost his leg to cancer, and I did all those things, and I won a lot of awards for that stuff. And because of that, my agent put me up for the job at Entertainment Tonight because I'd also done news and blah 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 blah. So I meet with John Goldhammer, who was at the time development director at Paramount. But because the first producer of the show had left, John was left with producing Entertainment Tonight and being the development head at Paramount. Not an easy task, because Entertainment Tonight really pulverized you when you got out of the booth that day, you know. So I meet with John. The preface had been, watch the show for a week. Watch the show for a week and come in and critique it for me. So I walked in and said, "Hey, John, I was at a conference a couple days ago and I saw your wife. She looked great." He said, "I'm getting a divorce." So he asks me to talk about the show, and I felt that the reporters didn't have a sign-off. They didn't say, you know, blah, 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 Entertainment Tonight. I said, you know, top of your show is news. It should have a news feel to it. And I said, I'd like to do unique segments. You know, this is a show about television and film. We could do 25 years of television, 25 years of great film, the top 10 news stories of our decade. He said, this is all good. He said, anything else? I said, yeah. I said, I think that blonde co-host has to go. And he said, I'm dating her. I can't tell you what it was like being in that seat. I mean, it was like, where the hell is the next exit? And he said, but I think you're right. He said, that will be one of the first things I want you to do is find us a new co-host. So I got there and I started looking through tapes, and I popped in this tape And in 10 seconds, I saw these bright blue eyes and these legs that just wouldn't quit. 10 seconds, I pulled the tape out. I said, I think we found her. And it took me about 3 weeks to convince them, but that was the beginning of Mary's career.
Mm-hmm. Mary Hart.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. What other changes did you feel was important to make and that you brought to the show?
Well, Jim Bellows was the executive producer of the shows. Jim was a fellow who had the most amazing career in newspapers. So they wanted to bring credibility to the show. You know, at first, when the reporters would go out, hi, my name is blah, blah, and I'm on Entertainment Tonight, and we're a news show about entertainment and blah, blah, blah. So, like, the litany of things you had to tell people before you asked them the first question, because they didn't know who the hell you were. And this hadn't been done before. There was no such thing as satellite transmission. Mm-hmm. So we had to establish that. We had to establish news credibility. We had to establish... I wouldn't say hard-hitting, but I would say at least inquisitive and questioning interviews with celebrities, so it didn't look like we were just going to, promote their next movie. Mm-hmm. And then we did 25 years of television in 25 days and 25 years of the movies and the things that we were talking about. And then we created a series with a fellow who looked like... he looked like Spencer Tracy, and we did it was sort of a cop series based on Hollywood mysteries. So we did a lot of unique things, and at a time I didn't have the responsibility, but it was also at a time where we introduced my goodness. Sybil, help me out here.
A person?
Yeah, Bruce did it on the weekends.
Huel, Robin?
No. We introduced the Brit.
Robin Leach.
Robin Leach, yeah. And that became a really important segment in the show, and Robin was a dear man. And excuse me for not remembering his name, and so all of that stuff came together. And people would say, wow, this show really works. And I'll never forget, we were at a conference down south in Laguna, and Barry Diller said, entertainment news will be with us as long as news is on the air. Mm-hmm. And that was the beginning. And then I got fired. And it was really hard, because the fellow coming in didn't like me and wanted to make his own mark. And so I wound up training the guy who was replacing me, who was actually an Emersonian, and we had a great time. But it was very, I would go to work, and I would go there even like 2 hours earlier, but I didn't, he didn't like me, that's all. But wow, no one had ever not liked me before and not said, wow, you're fabulous, And it was a really hard pill. But I left, and I went to work for Gary Smith, Dwight Hemming, and Nick Vanoff, the three most unbelievable men in entertainment. And I did that show for about 26 weeks.
Just a few more questions on Entertainment Tonight.
Yeah.
What do you think made it stand out from the other entertainment news shows?
Well, we were the first.
Right.
There were no other entertainment news shows at the time. See, the deal with Entertainment Tonight was nobody had satellite. Everything was bicycled. So, all the major markets would get the show the first week. But if you, like Mike Douglas or whomever, and if you weren't in the top 30 markets, you got that show the next week because it was sent to you. It was called bicycling. Mm-hmm. And you got the show that Boston saw last week, this week. So everything was delayed. So Paramount said, look, here's the deal. If you sign up for our show, Entertainment Tonight, it will be the first satellite-delivered show ever done in syndication. We'll buy you the satellite.
Smart. Very smart.
And that's how it got done.
Where did you look to for the breaking news stories, and how difficult was that to deal with when you were trying to get the
Well, we
info online?
had a excuse me. We had an office in New York. We had one in Nashville, and of course us in Hollywood. And quite frankly, we looked at newspapers, and the wire services, and we had a lot of crews out. We must have had 10 or 12 crews out on a daily basis. The day that Henry Fonda died, we had a show all put together, and I think he died about 7:30 in the morning, and that was it, gone. We rebuilt the whole show. We had tributes to him, and we actually split the reel, which means that we would tape a portion of the show. The satellite transmission, we were on Vine Street and Hollywood, Vine Street and Sunset Boulevard on one corner, and the wall building where the satellite transmitter was on the opposite corner where Simply Blues, the old restaurant, was. So that our tapes would have to go out of our building, across the street, in an elevator, up to the 18th floor, and then onto a tape machine. And what we did in some instances, we would double tape, so record on both two machines. And if we had to hit the bird by 3 o'clock, 12 o'clock LA time, 3 o'clock East Coast time for transmission. So we would send a runner out at 5 of 12, two runners. One would go on the west side of the street. One would not use the crosswalk, run across Vine Street. He would be on the east side of the street, and they would race across to the wall building so you could get the tape up first. Every day. But on the Henry Fonda passing day, we couldn't go and start taping at 11, which we usually did. We started taping at like 11:15, so we got the first segment done, and that went out the door at about 11:45 up on the satellite. So while that was on, we were taping the second and third segments. We tried to get Mark Rydell in to talk about On Golden Pond, and we did, but we didn't tape that segment until 12:15, keeping in mind that the show was already on the air on the East Coast for 15 minutes, and the last 12 minutes of the show wasn't done.
Nail biting.
A little bit. We all went across to the Brown Derby and got drunk that day.
I bet.
Yeah.
Just wrapping up on this show, how do you think the consumption of celebrity culture has changed since Entertainment Tonight launched and the rash of entertainment shows on television now?
Well, I think there's a couple of things. I think you first have to look at what the word celebrity is. I think a lot of what people think is celebrity is not necessarily celebrity. It's puffed up bullshit by people who don't belong to be on the air, who have no talent. You can draw your own conclusions on that. And then there are real celebrities who are artists in their own right, and those stories are important and should be covered. And the problem I have today, even with Entertainment Tonight, is that we were accused at the beginning of our stories running 2.5 minutes long by the guys running 60 minutes, saying, well, that's not an in-depth report. Our stuff is 20 minutes long. For that audience, you're right. But for our audience, no. At dinner time during the week, they want bits. So our pieces were 2.5 minutes long, and we were criticized for that. Today, they're 12 seconds long. And it's an accumulation of graphics and graphic moves, a minuscule soundbite. I can't watch anymore. I'm not going to say I'm a journalist, but I am a documentarian, and I cannot watch. My wife turns it on, and I have to walk out of the room. She said, please, grant me my pleasure for a half hour. I said, you have it. I just don't want to watch it.
Let's stop for a minute. Just change card.
Okay.
Do you need any water?
I'm going to just gel.